For more on this, I want to bring in Avi Melamed. He is a former Israeli intelligence official and the founder of the think tank Inside the Middle East, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Avi, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
So we know the IDF has been bombarding Gaza for weeks and conducting ground operations in an effort to, as they say, destroy Hamas and free the hostages. So how did the Israeli government reach the point where making a deal to release hostages was the option they chose?
Well, Andrew, there are two different parallel, I would say, paths or trajectories that the Israeli government has taken in the context of the situation in Gaza Strip. I've been saying that since day one of the war, Israel policy is to fight this war and to end Hamas rule as if there are no Israeli hostages, and at the same time, to negotiate the release of Israeli hostages as if there is no war. So these are two parallel trajectories that Israeli policy is following.
So from the Hamas point of view, why would they be making this deal, do you think?
Well, Hamas is under increasing enormously Israeli military pressure. One of Hamas' major assumption was that Israel would not go into such a wide, deep military ground operation in Gaza Strip. Obviously, Hamas was wrong about it. Every day that goes by, Hamas is losing more and more points and locations in Gaza Strip. It actually, to a large extent, the northern part of Gaza Strip is totally under Israeli control. And so Hamas understands that as the more the Israeli military operation is continuing and increasing, its rule in Gaza Strip is facing a real danger. We have to reiterate what the Israeli government said. The Israeli government ordered the Israeli Defense Forces to eliminate Hamas rule in Gaza Strip. As of now and in the foreseeable future, this is what the Israeli Defense Forces are going to do in Gaza Strip. They are doing that in Gaza Strip. So Hamas, for the time being, is trying to exhaust as much as possible the cards of the hostages that he holds, the civilians, in order to try somehow to save its rule in Gaza Strip. At least this is the policy Hamas is trying to conduct at this point.
And Avi, this deal was reached, of course, in the context of a war. Do you expect the terms agreed to will be adhered to in a smooth way, or could we see this fall apart? How fragile, or how would you characterize this deal and how it's going to play out over the next 4 days?
Well, it is a very fragile situation. It's very fluid. Look, on the one hand, yes, there is an agreement. There are some major players involved in brokering that deal, including Qatar and Egypt and the United States and others. So on the one hand, yes, it's for real. But on the other hand, we have our previous experience knowing that in such situation, you got a very fluid situation. It could very rapidly change on the ground. We just actually had an example today, reminding you, Andrew, and the audiences that today, there was actually supposed to be the beginning of this swoop, sort of speaking, of people. It didn't take place. It was kind of like postponed in the last minute for whatever the reason was. So yes, we should, on the one hand, expect, hopefully, that the deal will take off. But at the same time, we should also be expecting the possibility that it will be yet again postponed. And I would say that the major reason for such a postpone will be Hamas' attempts to try and yet to further exhaust that card of the hostages, particularly the civilians, the kids, the women, the elderly that Hamas is holding, because we have to understand something very significant from Hamas' perspective. As far as Hamas is concerned, those hostages is, roughly speaking, is almost its last resort to stay in power, and Hamas will try to exhaust that card as much as possible as it can, with all the ramifications that comes along with that.
We know from the list of names published by Israel that the most common reasons for the Palestinians who could be released being detained are throwing stones and harming regional security. Can you help us understand that term, harming regional security? What could that entail?
Yes, at this phase, we are talking about Palestinians who are imprisoned in Israel after they have been convicted in courts, in Israeli courts, for involvement in terror plots and terror engagements, activities like, for example, stabbing or throwing Molotov cocktails. We are looking at people, I'm talking about the Palestinians who are right now included with this swap deal, that have, on the one hand, they don't have any Israeli blood on their hand, meaning these are not people that caused the death of Israelis, but on the other hand, they have been involved in some sort of like hostilities, violent attacks, stabbing, shooting, trying to detonate explosives and other things that they have been involved in. So this is the specific, I would say, profile, roughly speaking, of this very specific group of 150 Palestinians imprisoned in Israel. And I want to emphasize, those are Palestinians imprisoned in Israel after they have been engaged in terror attacks, not resulting in the killing of Israelis, but resulting in the injuring of Israelis. They have been indicted at courts in Israel's court system, and they have been imprisoned. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about that specific category of the Palestinians. Right now, in the specific category of the 150 Palestinians that are supposed to be released in exchange of the release of the 50 Israeli hostages that are in the capacity or captivity of Hamas in Gaza Strip.
Given that we know this deal has been delayed, but so far it's still going to start happening around around midnight Eastern time, so in about 11 hours or 10 hours from now. What would you say that says about where we are in this war? Does it make you hopeful that this could be an ending of the conflict, that there could be a longer truce, that more hostages could be released, more aid gets in, and there are less bombardments?
Well, let me first say something about the situation from a military perspective in Gaza Strip. It's not about bombardments. Right now in Gaza Strip, for the last couple of weeks, there is a war going on in Gaza Strip between Israeli armed forces on the one hand and Hamas and Islamic Jihad, some 40,000 militants that are scattered in Gaza Strip. It's not about bombardments. It's about a war on the ground that it's taking place in Gaza Strip. So this is one thing. The other thing, look, Israeli government, following the massacre of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the massacre that Hamas and Islamic Jihad conducted on October 7th, resulting in the killing of 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilians, and the abducting of 240 Israelis, most of them civilians, Israeli government ordered the Israeli Defense Forces to eliminate Hamas rule in Gaza Strip. This is the order that was given to the Israeli Defense Forces by the Israeli government, and the Israeli Defense Forces are executing that order as it should. On the other hand, we have Hamas that actually, from its perspective, is trying, of course, to secure its rule in Gaza Strip and to save its rule in Gaza Strip. So obviously, you got here a conflicting interest, sort of speaking. Now, in that sense, the story of the hostages, as I mentioned before, on the one hand, obviously, Israeli government has interest to release the Israeli hostages as soon as possible and to bring those people back to the families. Hamas, on the other hand, has an interest to, as much as possible, prolong and keep these hostages under his control, because for Hamas, the hostages is one of the major, if not the major card to try and somehow secure its survival as a ruling factor in Gaza Strip. But whole and whole, when I look at the whole picture, I would say that the bottom line, at least in my mind, is very clear. Israel is insisting and determined to continue the military move to put end to Hamas rule over Gaza Strip. And that, I think, will be the trajectory of the things that we'll see ahead. In that context, I would just say that the Israeli Minister of Defense and all Israeli senior leaders very clearly stated in the last couple of days that this pause in the fight in order to make this swap of people, this is only a pause. Once that period of time is going to be done and over with, Israel is going to resume its military operation in Gaza Strip, because Israel insists to basically bring down Hamas rule in Gaza Strip to an end.
Avi, thank you. That is former Israeli intelligence official Avi Melamed joining us live from Tel Aviv.